When Clint Eastwood stepped onto Jimmy Kimmel's stage, he wasn't merely there to talk about a movie. He carried years of raw, unfiltered American spirit. What started as a light interview quickly turned into a fiery exchange about freedom, truth, and the price of staying quiet. Maggie, his trusted aide, had cautioned them, "Don't press him." They ignored her. What followed transformed late-night TV into a battle zone. This wasn't just about a chair. It was about who still earns a place at the table. The green room felt colder than it should have been. Not from the air conditioning, but from a tense stillness, like the calm before a blaze rips through dry grass. Clint sat alone in a sleek, steel-backed chair, too modern for a man who'd lived through eras on leather saddles and steely determination. In his worn hands, a single sheet of paper, thin and white, quivered faintly under his grip. 5 lines typed in crisp studio font, listed topics to steer clear of politics: the 2012 RNC speech, gun control, civil rights protests, voting record. His thumb lingered over the last line, pressing it gently, as if feeling the sharpness of a knife's edge. Maggie stood nearby, arms folded, posture stiff. She'd been with him through 5 presidencies, 2 marriages, and Hollywood's endless reinventions. If anyone could sense when Clint was about to erupt, it was her. Her voice was quiet but firm, aimed at a young producer in a headset who'd ventured too close with a nervous grin. "Don't get clever," she warned. "No jokes. No chasing viral clips. If you trap him, he won't play along, and no script in this place will save you." The producer blinked, gave a half laugh, then met her gaze. The laugh faded fast. He nodded, backed off, and slipped behind a curtain like a kid retreating from a snarling dog. Maggie turned back to Clint, who hadn't spoken, still staring at the paper. His eyes weren't angry, not yet, but the tight set of his jaw, the slow clench, stirred her unease. From the hallway, the studio band's rehearsal thumped, the bass line pulsing like a war drum, bouncing off concrete and plaster. Maggie glanced at her watch. 7 minutes until showtime. Clint folded the note carefully, deliberately, as if it were sacred or cursed, then tucked it into his blazer's inner pocket. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "They're gonna try something." It wasn't a question. Maggie stepped closer, voice low. "Yeah, they are." Clint nodded once. That was it. Across the hall, through a half-open door, 2 producers argued in hushed tones. One was older, polished, the type who wore suits even backstage. The other was younger, in a hoodie and sneakers, hair in purposeful disarray. "We need something huge," the young one urged. "He's been a meme before." "Lean into the chair bit. It's gold. Just a quick clip, a 30-second throwback. It'll blow up." The older one hesitated. "It's risky," he muttered. "He's unpredictable." "That's why it works." The younger one grinned. Back in the green room, Clint stood, his movements slow, intentional, like he was gearing up for a showdown, not a talk show. Maggie handed him a small paper cup of black coffee. He sipped it once, then set it down, untouched, on a side table. She watched him adjust his collar, tug his blazer snug across his shoulders. The note stayed tucked over his heart, like a warning no one else could see. The stage manager appeared at the door, clipboard in hand, face tight with forced cheer. 2 minutes, Mr. Eastwood. You're up after the monologue." Clint didn't respond. He stepped past without a word, boots echoing softly on the tile. Maggie trailed half a step behind as they approached the stage entrance. Laughter from Jimmy's opening monologue seeped through the curtain, something about celebrity gossip. The audience roared on cue. Clint stopped. His eyes narrowed, head tilting slightly toward the sound. He stood there, unmoving, for a full 10 seconds. Maggie knew that stance. The pause before a tempest, the breath before a gun is drawn. Behind them, the hallway cleared. Studio staff kept their distance. Everyone knew who he was, but more importantly, they knew what he could do when pushed. Maggie leaned in close. "Just talk about the movie," she whispered. "If they prod, don't strike first." Clint looked at her, and for a moment, a faint hint of a smile touched his lips. Then it vanished. The stage manager raised a hand, counting down with fingers 3, 2, 1. The curtain began to rise. The band launched into a brassy riff. Jimmy's voice boomed over the cheers. "Ladies and gentlemen, the icon himself." And Clint stepped into the spotlight. Backstage, just beyond the curtain's edge, the studio buzzed with noise and light. The crowd was still humming from Jimmy's monologue. Laughter lingering in the air like static. The band held a note just long enough to signal the shift. Everything was smooth, choreographed. A show on rails. But behind the precise timing and cue cards, in the dim hallway lined with cables and clipboards, a storm was brewing. In the control room, two producers stood side by side, watching the feed through tinted glass. The younger one, Nate, bounced lightly on his heels, phone in one hand, coffee in the other, eyes darting between screens, chasing energy, angles, the moment. "He's walking out now," he said. "Look at the crowd. They're loving it. Slip the chair bit in here, and we've got instant gold." Beside him, the older producer, Reed, stayed still. His jaw tightened, the only sign of strain. Reed had seen careers crash over stunts like this. Viral was great until it backfired. "Don't do it," he said. "It's not even political," Nate argued. "It's nostalgic, iconic. One little clip, and we've got Twitter hooked for days." Reed shot him a look. "You think he sees it that way?" Nate smirked. "He's an actor. He'll roll with it." Reed didn't answer. Instead, he leaned into the mic feeding the floor crew. "Tight camera on Kimmel. Don't cut to Eastwood without my say-so." Meanwhile, Maggie stood just offstage, hands clasped behind her back. Her eyes were locked on Clint, now seated under the studio lights. She wasn't watching the host, the crowd, or the chaos in the control room. She was watching his breathing, the way his hands rested, not loose, not clenched, but ready. Like a man who'd walked into a card game already sensing the bluff. Jimmy's voice danced through the studio, hitting his rhythm, switching between charm and jabs with practiced ease. The kind of host who made even tension sound like banter, and Clint gave him nothing. Not defiance, not amusement, just stillness. Behind the scenes, Nate moved to a separate monitor and tapped a cue file labeled Eastwood, RNC 12. The thumbnail froze on that infamous image: Clint on stage, gesturing to an empty chair, a decade old but still charged, still divisive. "This goes in at minute 4, Nate said, half to himself. "Set it up like a throwback." Jimmy jokes, crowd laughs, we roll the clip. Boom, viral. Reed stepped in front of the screen, blocking his view. "That's not the move," he said. "Why not?" "Because that chair's still radioactive. It's been 10 years, and the country's still split." Nate laughed under his breath, not mocking but dismissive. "Come on, man. He's been memed to death. You think he doesn't expect it? This is late night, not a documentary." Reed didn't flinch. "I think he's the kind who remembers exactly who laughed and why." Near the curtain, a production assistant leaned toward Maggie, whispering, "They're prepping the RNC clip." She didn't react immediately, just blinked once. "Are they out of their minds?" The assistant shrugged helplessly. "Orders from above. Ratings are down this week. They want a spike." Maggie turned her gaze back to Clint. He was answering a question now, voice steady. Something about the land in his new film, The Ranch. The quiet struggle over property rights. It was subtle, but Maggie caught the edge. He was already laying groundwork, drawing a line between story and reality, and they were about to cross it. In the control room, the director's voice cut through the feed. "Stand by on clip 3. Ready playback." Reed clenched his fists. "Don't push it," he said quietly. Nate ignored him, already picturing headlines: "Eastwood revisits the chair." The stage manager whispered through his headset. Reed reached for the comm. "Don't." Too late. Jimmy leaned forward, smile tight. "So, Clint, before we get too heavy, let's take a quick stroll down memory lane." Clint's eyes didn't shift. "A decade back," Jimmy continued, "you gave a little unscripted talk at a certain national convention. About a chair." The crowd chuckled, unsure if it was safe to laugh. Maggie whispered under her breath, "Don't do it. Don't you dare." Jimmy turned to the screen behind them. "Let's take a peek." The studio lights dimmed for the clip, but the tension spiked. Clint didn't move. Not his face, not his body, but something shifted. A silence that wasn't scripted, a stillness that wasn't passive. Maggie felt it in her chest. That room was about to explode. She didn't look at the screen. She looked at Clint, and Clint was looking at Jimmy. The studio lights flicked back up, soft and warm, casting an artificial glow over the set. The band's final note faded into polite applause, as Jimmy turned to his guest with a smile polished enough to smooth stone. Clint leaned back, spine straight, eyes steady, one boot slightly forward, like he was bracing for rough ground. "It's an honor to have you here," Jimmy said, his tone bright, almost reverent. You've got a new film out. Tell us about it. What pulled you back to directing? Clint didn't move at first. Then, slowly, he tilted his head toward Jimmy, voice low and even. I never stopped. The audience chuckled. A few clapped, unsure if it was a joke. Jimmy grinned, nodding like he'd anticipated the response. He leaned in, elbow on the desk. The film's about a rancher, right? A guy defending his land from a corporate grab. Clint gave a small nod. It's about holding your ground. Jimmy jumped on the phrase. A metaphor for something bigger. Clint paused, then said, no, just the ground. Another ripple of laughter, lighter this time. Jimmy's smile tightened at the edges. He shifted gears. This rancher, is he like you? Clint shrugged. He keeps to himself until someone gives him a reason not to. The line landed. The crowd buzzed with it. Maggie, watching from the wings, exhaled through her nose. She'd heard it in rehearsal, knew it was coming. Still sent a chill through her. Jimmy tapped his pen on the desk. There's a line in the trailer. Something about freedom not being free. Clint said nothing. You've always leaned into that kind of talk. Jimmy pressed. Freedom, justice, gunslingers. But how do you see that now, with everything happening today? Clint's fingers tightened slightly on the armrest. A pause stretched between them. The audience quieted, sensing the shift. Freedom, Clint said, who'sn't about what you carry? It's about knowing when you don't need to. Jimmy blinked. So, you're saying guns aren't freedom? Clint continued, the ability to not reach for one. That's the part nobody wants to discuss. A few murmurs from the audience. Someone clapped. Someone hissed. Jimmy raised his eyebrows, shifting in his seat, trying to keep things moving. Let's switch tracks for a second. You've been in this game for decades. TV westerns, Dirty Harry. Did you ever think you'd still be making films at this age? Clint looked at him, not smiling, not annoyed, just looking. Did you ever think you'd still be asking questions that missed the mark? The crowd tensed. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it cut deep. Jimmy laughed too quickly. All right, I walked into that one. He leaned back, regrouping, picking up a card from the desk, skimming it like he needed a lifeline. Clint didn't look away, posture unchanged. Maggie from backstage tilted her head, eyes narrowing. She felt the air tremble. The host was trying to stay in charge. The guest wasn't letting him. Jimmy cleared his throat. I read you still ride horses every morning. That true, maybe still carry a revolver. Clint didn't answer right away. Then, with no inflection, he said, you watch too many films. The audience laughed again, nervous now. Jimmy chuckled with them, but a flicker of irritation, or realization, crossed his eyes. All right, he said, just trying to give the fans what they want. Clint looked at the audience, then back at Jimmy. Are you? Jimmy raised his hands, deflecting. Hey, we love you. We just want the stories, the good ones, the real ones. Then stopped trimming their edges. The sentence landed like a weight. Not angry, not loud, but heavy. Jimmy opened his mouth, then closed it. Maggie shook her head in the shadows. Not because Clint had said too much, but because she knew he was just starting. The laughter thinned, stretched brittle, like glass about to shatter. Jimmy shuffled his cue cards with a casual flair, but his fingers tapped the desk too fast. Clint sat still, but his stillness buzzed with something deeper. Not a performance, not anger, just presence, heavy and unyielding. Jimmy tried again, voice a touch too light. So, Clint, we've been talking about the new film. Grit, land, justice, classic stuff. But this isn't the first time you've spoken out about the state of things. A few in the crowd chuckled, sensing the direction. I mean, come on, who could forget that famous chair speech? A low ripple of reaction. Some laughs, some groans. Jimmy flashed a grin. You remember that one, right? 2012 Republican National Convention. You walked out and talked to, what was it? The conscience of America, he laughed. A few audience members followed, but it didn't spread. Clint looked at him, then at the monitor as it flickered on behind them. The screen showed grainy footage Clint beside an empty chair, gesturing, improvising, firing off lines about invisible leaders and broken promises. It had been mimed, mocked, dissected, debated. For younger viewers, it was just a YouTube clip. For Clint, it was a scar. For those who saw it live back then, it was a crack in the cultural foundation. Jimmy gestured to the screen. Let's take a look, shall we? The The lights dimmed slightly. The clip played. Clint's younger voice, rougher, looser, rang through the speakers, holding nothing back. In the shadows, Maggie tensed. She didn't need to look at Clint to know what was coming. When the clip ended, the lights brightened. Jimmy leaned into the moment. So tell us, who were you really talking to that night? The president, the voters, or just a chair? The audience laughed louder, relieved for a joke, grasping for familiarity. Clint didn't laugh. Didn't blink. I was talking to a hole, he said softly. Jimmy blinked. Pardon. Clint leaned forward, voice steady. I was talking to the empty space left behind when leadership stops listening. The room hushed. When politics turns into noise instead of action, Clint continued. When men shake hands on camera and stab backs behind closed doors, that chair wasn't empty by accident. It was empty by design. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Some leaned forward, others pulled back. Jimmy tried to steer. Yeah, but you knew it'd stir things up, right? That it'd be misunderstood. Clint's eyes narrowed slightly. People don't misunderstand silence. They fear it because it makes them fill in the blanks themselves. The tension in the studio was palpable now, clinging to the rigging, the rafters. Jimmy glanced at the producer's booth, then back at Clint, still trying to regain control. Come on, Clint. That night, some thought you went off script, maybe lost the thread. Clint's voice cut through, calm as a blade. The thread was already lost. I just pointed to the hole it unraveled from. More murmurs, a few claps, a few curses. Jimmy's grin was fading. He sat back, forced a laugh. Well, I guess we won't play that clip again anytime soon. Clint didn't answer. You're kind of proving the point. Jimmy said, trying to reclaim the room. We can't even joke about a chair without starting a riot. Maybe it's just TV. Maybe it's not that deep. Clint looked at the audience, scanning the rows, voice low. That's the problem. You think because it's on a screen, it's safe. You think the lights make it less real. He turned back to Jimmy. But when people stop expecting anything from the chair, when they stop believing anyone will sit in it and actually listen, that's when the country starts to rot. The crowd stilled, not frozen but feeling, processing. Maggie's hands clenched at her sides, jaw set. She knew this wasn't about a film, a clip, or a host chasing laughs. This was a man dragging a symbol into the light, exposing the decay beneath the polish. Jimmy exhaled sharply. Okay, Clint, you've made your point. Just a chair. No, Clint leaned in, voice firm. Not just a chair. A mirror. For a split second, Jimmy Kimmel had nothing to say. The silence after Clint's words wasn't empty. It was charged, tight as a wire stretched between towers. In the studio, no one moved. The band didn't stir. The floor crew didn't breathe. Jimmy sat a beat too long, blinking like the lights had intensified. Then, with a small shrug, he leaned forward, playing casual. All right, he said. So the chair was a mirror. Fair enough. But since we're cracking open tough truths, let's go another round. He shifted, trying to smile but not quite landing it. You talk about leadership, silence, people being left out. But when the country erupted in protests, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, all of it, where were you? The crowd stirred. Maggie stiffened backstage. Jimmy pressed on, voice steady but sharp. You believe in freedom, right? Standing your ground. Why not stand with them? Why not say Black Lives Matter? Clint's eyes didn't narrow, his mouth didn't twist. He just looked at Jimmy, like a man weighing a question tossed too lightly. Freedom, he said, isn't something you borrow for a march. You either have it or you don't. Jimmy opened his mouth, but Clint continued. You want to talk about standing up? Fine, let's talk about all the folks who marched, chanted, held signs for cameras, then switched off their conscience when the stream ended. A hush fell again. The audience was splitting, sensing the edge. Jimmy tried to cut in, but Clint's voice sliced through, calm but razor sharp. You think freedom has a color. It doesn't. But hypocrisy sure does. It wears whatever cause is trending that week, wrapped in slogans, sold in hashtags. The first wave of reaction hit. Gasps, cheers, boos. The crowd fractured audibly. Clint didn't flinch. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, eyes steady. I'm not here to play saint with the left or martyr with the right. I've seen too many flags waved by men who never bled for anything real. Jimmy's smile was brittle now, like a shell ready to crack. So what, You don't support protests. I support people who live what they shout, Clint said. You show up when the cameras leave, the rest is noise. More applause, more protest. Someone in the back yelled something unclear. A woman near the front half stood, then sat, shaking her head. Maggie muttered, "No commercial break can fix this." Jimmy adjusted his collar. "But don't you think silence can mean complicity?" Clint nodded. "Sometimes. But shouting empty words is complicity too. Just dressed up nicer." The air was electric, the audience a live wire. Clint wasn't raising his voice, but each sentence hit like a weight dropped from above. Jimmy tried to laugh. "You sure know how to stir a crowd." Clint's reply was instant. "They're not stirred. They're waking up." The floor producer gestured wildly at the booth. "Cut, go to break." But the cameras stayed live. Someone upstairs was watching the numbers climb. Jimmy glanced at the crew, then back at Clint. "So, what would you have done if not take a knee or hold a sign? What's the right way to stand up?" Clint looked past him, at the crowd. His voice dropped slightly. "The right way. You live it. You vote like it counts. You work like your name's on the laws. You teach your kids to see people, not colors. And you don't wait for a hashtag to care about justice." The room swelled with mixed reactions, shouts, applause, murmurs folding into a rising tide. Jimmy shook his head, exhaled hard. "You talk like the system's already broken." Clint's response was quiet, not defeated, just true. It was never whole. Maggie closed her eyes for a moment. She'd seen Clint rattle cages before, but this was different. This was a man cutting open the room with truth like a blade, and no one was safe. The room trembled, not from movement but from weight. The kind that presses your chest and makes your hands forget their purpose. Jimmy sat still, half turned to the crowd, as if gauging whether they were with him or against him, whether this could be salvaged. His fingers tapped the desk. No rhythm, just noise. Clint didn't move, shoulders square, posture like stone. He looked not at Jimmy but into the camera. The red light blinked live. "That chair," he said quietly, "wasn't for a president. It was for the people no one mentions once the confetti's swept up, and the slogans fade in the sun. For the ones working 2 jobs and still losing the house. For the vet who can't afford a therapist. For the mother whose kid didn't come home, not because of grades, but bullets." The crowd, stunned moments ago, reacted in waves. A woman near the front stood, hand over her mouth. Applause broke out, scattered, then louder, but not unified. Just as many booed, some shouting him down, others shouting him up. The air cracked with division. No cue cards could contain this. Maggie watched from the wing, face pale, jaw tight. She saw Jimmy glance at the control booth again, this time desperate for help. The floor manager stood frozen, headset askew, whispering orders no one followed. Clint kept going, voice calm but wired with steel. "You want to know who I was talking to that night, that empty chair? I was talking to a ghost. A million ghosts. Americans who vanished from the conversation because they didn't fit the headline. Not loud enough. Not photogenic. Not useful." He leaned in slightly, eyes locked on the lens. "And they're still gone. Still unseen. Because both sides would rather yell at each other than sit down and hear the people they claimed to fight for." The crowd erupted again. Some on their feet clapping, others pointing, shouting over the noise. The band wasn't playing. The lights didn't dim. There was no commercial, no break, no edit to soften this. Jimmy sat, hands flat on the desk, lips thin, his show, his name on the wall, his turf, and none of it was his anymore. Maggie took one step forward, just enough to be seen by Clint, signaling it was time to go. But he raised his hand, a simple, final gesture. "Not yet." Then he stood slowly. The audience fell half silent, like someone had turned down the volume but left the static. Clint turned, not to Jimmy, not to Maggie, but to the camera. His voice dropped lower but somehow grew louder. "That chair's not empty anymore." The words hit like stone on steel, needing no explanation, just echo. He held the moment, let it sink in, let it sting. Maggie exhaled through her nose, no smile, but something in her eyes. Pride mixed with heartbreak. She'd warned them, not because Clint was unpredictable, but because he was precise. Behind her, a junior producer fumbled with his tablet, trying to cue a bumper. Someone yelled about ads, the sponsor window closing. No one listened. Jimmy finally stood, not to take control, but because sitting felt wrong. He looked at Clint, then the audience, then the chair beside his desk, and for the first time that night, he was speechless. Clint nodded once, turned, and walked off stage. The crowd roared. Part applause, part protest, all real. Outside, the night air was cooler than expected, settling under the skin without permission. Clint stepped out of the studio's side door, the crowd's echo still rattling through the concrete walls. He didn't look back, didn't speak, just walked slowly, hands at his sides, each step measured, like a man used to gravel and silence after fire. Maggie followed, her heels clicking once for every two of his steps. She didn't rush, didn't try to fill the quiet. He'd said enough for one night, maybe for years. Behind them, the studio lights pulsed and flickered. Inside, chaos reigned, producers shouting into headsets, PR teams drafting statements before the outro music even started. The next guest was cancelled, the next segment scrapped. Social media was already ahead. Within 90 seconds, the clip of Clint walking off was online, unedited, unfiltered, just the wide shot of him leaving the chair, the crowd splitting like a broken tide. By the 5-minute mark, hashtags surged Fight Clint was right, Fight Eastwood erupts, Fay chair not empty. Views climbed in real time, millions by midnight. Cable news pounced. One conservative anchor called it the most disrespectful moment in live TV history, branding Clint a relic chasing relevance with theatrics. A left-leaning commentator called it dangerous, saying giving Clint a live mic in 2025 was like handing a match to a dry field. But in the middle, a quiet voice on an independent podcast whispered it might have been the most honest 5 minutes on TV in a decade. A moment where someone said the unspoken and refused to smile after. Maggie caught up to Clint as they reached the black SUV at the curb. She didn't touch his arm, just walked beside him. "You always know, don't you?" she said, "how to make a room go silent. Not by shouting, just by telling the truth." He didn't answer, but she hadn't expected him to. Behind them, the banner on the studio wall fluttered in a sharp gust, one corner ripping free. A glossy image of Jimmy's face folded back on itself, the word, LV, tearing down the middle, flapping like an open wound. Maggie glanced back. Clint didn't. He paused at the sidewalk's edge, looked up at the night sky. A helicopter's red light pulsed against the clouds. Below, the city hummed, horns, engines, the buzz of a country too busy to breathe. Clint exhaled. Back inside, the show limped to a close. Jimmy sat at his desk, voice flat, trying to joke through the closing lines. The crowd's laughter came late, unsure, like muscle memory without heart. The music played them out, too loud, too bright. A fireworks show at a funeral. But nothing could outshine the image burned into screens, nationwide, a man walking away from the spotlight, like he never needed it, and never would again. Clint opened the SUV door. Maggie slid in beside him. No words, just the faint creak of leather seats, and the slam of a door shutting out the world's noise. As the car pulled away, camera phones kept rolling, but Clint didn't wave, didn't nod, just stared ahead as the studio lights faded in the rear window. Somewhere behind them, the chair still sat on that stage, not empty anymore. Not really. And maybe that was the point.